Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast episode number 133. And given today's guest, I imagine that quite a few of you are going to be new listeners, so just a wee second to explain what this is all about. These podcasts have been running since way before the independence referendum. They're totally free to download. You can find them in a number of places, on iTunes, on Facebook, or downloading directly from my site, that's michaelgreenwell.wordpress.com, or from Spreaker.com. This show is not aligned to any particular party. We have SNP, Green, Rise, SSP, generally just anyone involved with the independence movement. And unlike certain famous Better Together ads, no one is ever told to shut up and eat their cereal. Anyway, on to today's show. And today we've got Tommy Sheppard, the Member of Parliament for Edinburgh East. Tommy's been involved in politics in a number of ways for a long number of years, as well as having some other business ventures. And we talked about some of his experiences with that, and then we got on to his candidacy for the SNP deputy leadership. Finally, as always with a new guest, I asked him why he supports Scottish independence. So let's just go to the conversation, and I'll have a wee word with you at the end. Hi Tommy, how's it going?
Hi, yeah, it's going good, Mike. Busy.
Yeah, what have you been up to this morning?
Well, I've just written my national article. I do that in the middle of the week for every Saturday. I don't know if your listeners have been reading them, but during the deputy leadership contest, they've offered all the candidates the opportunity to pen a column each week, which I think we're all taking advantage of, which is helping to get some ideas out there. And this week I'm bemoaning the fact that we haven't got a female candidate on the slate, and that's no excuse to not think about what we should be doing still to try and improve the lot of women both in Scotland and in our party. So my theme for this week, and that's what I've been doing for the last hour and a half.
I'm interested to know, how does the SNP stack up in terms of membership, male to female?
I'm not sure the latest stats, because I mean membership keeps rising. Certainly it used to be. I mean, it used to be in line actually with other political parties. It was about 70-30 male. You know, joining a political party has always been more of a male thing than a female thing. These are UK-wide statistics. My guess, anecdotally, I mean, certainly in terms of my own branch here, it's better than that. It's closer to 60-40 after the surge, as it were, in new members. So I think disproportionately, women were joining the party amongst the people who've been joining for the first time in the last couple of years.
So going in the right direction anyway.
It's going in the right direction, yeah. And we have now. I mean, the SNP now. I mean, the SNP used to have a problem with the electorate, in that men were more likely to vote for it than women. There was always a bit of a gender gap in our supporters in the electorate, but that seems to have disappeared now. And the last surveys that have been done over the last few years show that we are supported pretty much equally by men and women.
And just because we've started on party matters already, I'd quite like to go back quite a few years, because the SNP wasn't the first party you joined, was it?
No, that's right. I mean, at the age of just before my 21st birthday, when I was at Aberdeen University, I joined the Labour Party. After several years, actually, of being politically active in student politics and various anti-nuclear campaigns at that time. Any of your older listeners may remember SCRAM, the Scottish Campaign to Resist the Atomic Menace. That was my first major political organisation. So yes, I joined the Labour Party, and I got very heavily involved in the Labour Party. I was in it for 20 years and became a deputy leader of Hackney Council in London and a parliamentary candidate for them. And then 3 years a full-time organiser. And that was I was appointed under John Smith at the time. And when he died, Tony Blair took over and began to change the Labour Party. And eventually he asked me to leave as well. So I got made redundant under Tony Blair. It was only a short time after that the Labour Party finally left me.
So he actually asked you to leave?
Yes, indeed. Well, not personally, but he sanctioned it. Yeah, it was others that asked me to consider leaving. So we did a deal. They made me redundant, and I used the money as the down payment on the Stand Comedy Club, and turned that into a successful business. So, you know, I'm probably a lot happier than if I had stayed the Labour Party. But anyway, so it was like 16 years since I left the Labour Party. It took me. I spent more than a decade not being in any party.
Yeah. And can I just ask, is it the Stand Club, was it the one in Park Road in Glasgow? Because I used to live right next to it and go to it quite often.
No, Glasgow was the second club. The first one was in Edinburgh. It opened in March 1998. It's just round the corner from St Andrew's Square. Then we opened Glasgow in April 2000, a couple of years after.
And before we get on to the heavy politics, this is one of the questions I have written down to ask you.
Uh-huh.
Where do you generally find more ridiculous characters or comedy? In the comedy clubs or in Westminster?
That's a hard choice. I have to say, Westminster's pretty boring these days compared to what it used to be. There's very few of the flamboyant and Ken Speckle characters that there used to be. The days of Nicky Fairbairn and Tam DL are long gone. So a lot of it's been dumbed down, and they're quite boring. Men and women in suits on the make.
But
So I guess I'd have to say you're probably going to get more interesting characters in the comedy club.
no, because you wrote an article about the 10 most ridiculous things, and
Yeah,
I sort of mentioned a few in one of the couple of times I was down there as well, and like the pageantry seems so overblown and ridiculous these days.
yeah. I mean, a lot of it is just sycophantic backslapping from people who want to defend a system built on privilege and pomposity. So it's the problem is that some of it actually gets in the way of governing the country as well, and makes the whole system fairly unfit for purpose. I mean, the fact that they pay us to stand in line for about 3 hours a week, waiting in a queue to give our name to a clerk rather than allow us to vote electronically on something, is just one indication of how ridiculous it is.
Mm-hmm. And if you're down there, you see it as a job, you're trying to work hard for constituents. How difficult is it to remove yourself from all that?
I don't think. I mean, people have said that after the SNP's success, and in 2015, and the group of 56 of us going down there, that some of them would turn native and get seduced by the corridors of the corridors of power, but I call them the corridors of impotence. But it hasn't happened. We all know what we're there for, which is to stand up for the people that elected us and continue our path towards being able to govern ourselves one day. So we're not joining the system or anything. Nobody should be too worried about that. That said, we have to play the game to a certain extent to get things done for the people who elected us, particularly if you're taking up, individual cases and on behalf of a constituent. So we're diligent and we're thorough about doing the job, but we're not under any illusions whatsoever that we are working our way out of there.
Was it a conscious choice of yours when you decided to stand for election to go for Westminster instead of Holyrood, or is it something that the party decides?
Well, it was just what came up. In fairness, I mean, because I joined, immediately after the referendum, and then got, I'd been thinking about it for a while, and that was the catalyst. And I guess I'm one of these people, but I don't join something just to sit on the sidelines. So I got stuck in. And then a number of people said to me, "Well, look, because of the referendum, of course, the SNP was way behind in terms of selecting people for the 2015 Westminster election. Everything had been put on hold, so we had to, the party had to catch up pretty fast, and all of these positions came up, and I thought people encouraged me to do it, and I thought it would be something I'd like to do, and I relished. I went after this seat in Edinburgh East quite deliberately because I knew I knew it well, and it was a strong Labour area, and I thought that is where I could apply my knowledge and experience to that electorate, and I could get them to transfer their allegiance. Which, I mean, I shouldn't have bothered. If people were transferring their allegiance en masse throughout the entire country anyway. But I thought at the time that that's why I would prefer to fight a seat like this rather than a posher suburb.
And is it Edinburgh that you've stayed in most in Scotland? Has that been your base since you've been in Scotland?
Yeah. I mean, well, I went to Aberdeen for 5 years, studied there, and then I went to London, and then came back to Edinburgh. I've been here 23 years now.
So it's essentially your local area.
Yeah, and I'm not. They'll bury me here. Edinburgh's my adopted city. I have no intention of ever going anywhere else. So,
I'd like to get on to the deputy leader election just in a moment, but there was another thing I wanted to ask you, because there's been something that's been bothering a number of social media commentators and other journalists recently, is because you obviously you grew up in Northern Ireland, and I was recently there, and I was in a place you may have heard of. It's not necessarily the most united community. It's called Ognacloy.
Ognacloy,
yeah, where it was the most amazing thing I've seen. Like there's the 12th of July, and it was around that time, And so all of one side of the street was Union Jack. On the other side of the street, there was nothing because in that town, all the Protestants live on one side and all the Catholics live on the other side. And the locals were telling me also that there's a Catholic Chinese restaurant, there's a Protestant Chinese restaurant, and so on. And this made me really think quite badly about people who've been writing articles in the papers recently about the Ulsterisation of Scottish politics. And I think there's a certain ignorance involved unless you actually go to some of these places in Northern Ireland and see what it's really like. I think the Ulsterisation of Scottish politics is a completely incorrect term, but I'd be interested to hear your opinion on that.
Well, the sort of thing you're describing. I mean, I grew up in that as a kid in the 70s, and it's because of what you're describing that I wanted to get away, and I don't live there anymore. So, I've got that experience, obviously, but I wouldn't be sticking my oar in now to offer any solutions to it. Scotland's my adopted country, Edinburgh's my adopted city, and I'm a political representative here, so it's not for me to try and offer words of wisdom to people who are doing their best in difficult circumstances in the north of Ireland, But to talk about the Ulsterisation of Scotland, I mean, that's just nonsense. I've never heard it's complete and absolute nonsense. I mean, put about by people who haven't got a clue what they're talking about in the main. So I have no concerns whatsoever that the debate about independence is creating that. In fact, one of the interesting things I think about the Yes campaign is the way in which it transcended sectarian lines. I mean, it drew support from, particularly in the west of Scotland, where there is a religious divide. It drew support equally from both communities. So I think that's a commendable thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting point there as well, because you actually started campaigning for Yes before you joined the SNP. So
Yeah.
Why did you decide to do that?
Well, like I say, so the Labour Party left me at the turn of the millennium, really, and I spent a few years building up the business and trying to make the Stand a successful business. And but I was still always interested in politics, so I kept my hand in. And I was been on the board of a journal called Scottish Left Review, for example, since pretty much since it began.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it was around about 2005 or 6, I joined the board of the Scottish Independence Convention, which was an cross-party, non-party group that tries to raise the profile and coordinate the independence campaign. So I was asked to join that because I'd been writing some stuff. And I suppose it was at that time that I became convinced in my mind of the cause of independence. It was probably, I had already been, I was in the Labour Party. One of the reasons why my face didn't fit is I was rather too keen on the party's devolution policy. I wanted a maximal position in that run. Others were wanting a minimal one. But I mean, I was always pro Home Rule anyway. And then I began probably around about between 2003 and 2005. I just intellectually came to a very firm position that independence was the way to achieve the type of change I wanted to see in society. And there are a number of reasons for that we can go into, but that then meant that, I mean, so in the second half of the noughties, I was involved in various things and agitating and writing and meeting people and in and around what then was going to become the Yes campaign. So really when the SNP got the majority government in 2011. And the starting pistol was fired on the Yes campaign. I was like a dog out of a trap, really. I mean, I was raring to go. So I threw myself into that campaign for a couple of years. But I didn't think about joining the SNP then because I thought the strength of the Yes campaign was that it was, it was cross-party. And whilst the SNP had done a fantastic job to actually get us to the point where the question could be asked, in order to get the right result, the right answer to that question, the SNP would need to work with a much broader range of alliances than just itself. And I mean, and everybody I spoke to in the SNP at that time understood exactly that as well. So I thought my role would be to be better served actually as developing the non-party sort of independent voices behind the Yes campaign, which is where I put my energy. After the 18th of September, obviously, the whole ballgame changed.